All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Pursuit of Ownership. It is Payton here, and I have Richard on the show with me today. Richard, how you doing?
Pretty good. We were just hanging out this weekend.
We sure were. We are, fresh off of a SP quarterly meeting. We were down in Austin this weekend, which is great. Nice drive away from me. Didn't have to buy a flight, which I always appreciate. But yeah, it was a great weekend. Great being around everyone. Great seeing everyone. We see each other so much on Zoom that it's honestly great just to be able to hang out and spend some FaceTime with each other.
Totally. I think a big shout out to Olivia is due here. Olivia, Peyton's fiance, drove down with Peyton, and her vehicle was the only vehicle that weekend that we had access to consistently. And she saved our butt. Christine got to come meet Olivia. She really, really liked Olivia. She thought she was a ton of fun, as well as the rest of the team. Yeah. And Olivia let us borrow her car to go see Christine's aunt in West Austin, and just generally, she's an amazing person. So I don't know if you shout out your fiance on the podcast, but I'm doing it for you here.
She's definitely been mentioned before, and I'm sure she will definitely appreciate that. Honestly, when you said you're going to shout out Olivia, I really had no idea where you were taking it. I was like, this could be anything. I don't know. But yes, she was very generous in letting us borrow her car for pretty much the whole weekend. So yeah, definitely shout out to her for that.
It was clutch. And her playlist was really good on the boat. There was a party boat, and Sean, I love you, Sean, but your playlist was just a little too hard for my liking, and Olivia's was just right. It was good. Some classic rock in there, some Weezer. It was good.
Yeah, she's definitely the king of some classic throwback jams. I'll give her that for sure.
Nice.
Just really plays all ages, of course.
Right.
But yeah, so I decided to bring Richard on the show today because, as a lot of you know, he has recently gone through a transition, and despite his Army involvement and being in residency for so long, he's had a plethora of transition experiences by now. So I figured it'd be good to get him on the show and just kind of ask him about, different parts of his transitions. Like he was kind of saying before we got on, some of his transitions have been PPO, some of them have been fee for service. And then he's also kind of dabbled in both startups and acquisitions. So he can really draw from a wealth of personal experience and knowledge in these areas. So I think it's always good to hear stories from people that have done it, and so that's what we're gonna explore here with Richard today. So yeah, Richard, I guess just for the people who haven't heard, what has your most recent acquisition experience been like?
Sure. So I left a group of 3 practices. I bought 3 practices with some awesome partners, and turns out we just didn't have the same vision long term. And it also turns out that I like to spend money, and when you've got partners, it's a whole lot harder to spend money the way you want to spend money, including things like CBCTs and expanding and stuff that makes your practice unprofitable for a period of time. And so all of that being said, realized last October that I needed to do something else. And so left my partnership, and my partners were very gracious in the whole process to kind of explore possibilities and figure out what was best. And I ended up walking away and just doing kind of a clean walk away. And they were refinancing the practices anyways, in order to kind of continue to expand. And they had a big acquisition. And so at that time, they refinanced me off the debt, and I was free to go pursue something else. And initially was looking at doing a startup at the same time that I was looking for an acquisition. So I was trying to follow all of our advice and the SP philosophy and have all options open, which is good and terrifying. And it's also the same time I discovered TikTok.
Oh man. Oh gosh. Do we even want to go there?
No, we don't. But it was like, I think there's a time period when you're thinking about a startup where there's all these ideas in your head of what you could do with your dental startup. And that time lined up with the time I discovered TikTok. And it just was a rabbit hole of just I could do this, and I could do this, and I could do this. And TikTok's just another social media platform that is viral in different ways than other social media platforms. And so I spent many a night like thinking about all these possibilities. And I think that's generally true of startups is this like there's kind of a fantasy phase of planning a startup of like all the possibilities and what ifs um, that are not necessarily realistic, but a ton of fun to think about. And it was weird for a couple months. That was the land that like my headspace was in.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Um, that's actually a really good point about the startups and kind of the fantasy world. I feel like startups to me are kind of like on a scale. Like you have a startup that you build strictly from just like a profit standpoint, like nothing flashy, maximizing your space, all of that kind of just business minded, building a practice. And then on the opposite side of that, there's the building the super fancy practice, the all the nice finishes, accessories, and it's just kind of a sliding scale of where you kind of fit in that line. And I feel like TikTok, like you were saying, is one of those things that you can add a lot of value to, a practice, a location, brand with relatively little resources. So um, it's it's definitely a good resource for practice owners if they're willing to commit to it.
Well, and that was the other thing is that like even though and I got deep into like the video gear, filming, editing, all the stuff that's like not a good use of your time as a dentist. Um, but it's also a huge time sink. And for every dentist that actually takes off and does well on TikTok, there's probably another five that like flounder and create some weird content and it never takes off or yields any fruit. Um, but I'll also say with that unrealistic startup, that scale that you mentioned, I was leaning towards I kind of wanted to be fancy. Like I wanted a fancy startup. I wanted this startup to be an expression of me, and I wanted this startup to like have a charity and a cause. And so there was like a lot. I was like emotionally pouring a lot into like what this startup meant in my head, um, and ran into really quick. Like if you want to be fancy and you want to do a big startup, it gets pricey quick.
I'm
Um,
sure.
I saw someone on the Making of a Dental Startup page the other day who had a beautiful startup, huge. I think they were like 1.2 million in on the startup.
Wow. That's definitely one of the biggest upfront costs I've seen.
Yeah, and it was in a I can't remember if it was in a Canadian metro. So, there is some like Canadian dollar to that, and it was also in a competitive metro. But it's also at the end of the day, like this isn't your home, it's a business. Like that's one of my favorite lines from Dr. Austin Davis. And
I knew that when you said that, I was like, I totally think of Austin right now.
yes, definitely an Austin line. And it serves a function, and you can still have a very clean, good-looking dental practice and not break the bank on a startup. So, but anyways, I was talking with a commercial realtor and looking at spaces, pricing out spaces, comparing spaces, and at the same time, I was working with a broker, and I had told the broker, I said, "Hey, I'm looking for." I thought I was going to do kind of what George outlined, which is get to a 2 to 3 doctor, huge hygiene base, general practice. Because before, I guess we should go back to like my original kind of like failed vision of what I thought I wanted in dental school. I realized I didn't like fillings and crowns that much, so I was like, I'll get to 3 practices and I'll do the specialty work between them. And so that's what I attempted. And what I realized was I don't really love doing that because between equipment, team, like inefficiencies around doing lots of different specialty procedures at lots of different offices, that doesn't work super well. You can make it work, but I also, there wasn't enough to keep me busy of doing the kind of dentistry I wanted to do. So then I thought maybe if I get a big enough practice, there'll be enough of that specialty work that I can do in one location, and then it'll be more efficient. And so I told the broker, hey, I'm looking for either a larger 2 doc practice with at least 8 ops or a, a bustling single doc practice with room to expand the real estate next door. So I could acquire, I could then lease the adjacent space and do like a pseudo startup into the neighboring space. And and the broker here, Thad Miller, he's the founder of DDS Match, the website ddsmatch.com, and you can like build a profile as an associate or looking for a practice. Practice owners can list there. He is actually the broker in Indiana, so he's the one who founded the website. Now they've got like DDS Match markets all over the U.S., but he's the one who's actually here in Indiana. So I told him what I was looking for, and he delivered a practice that was exactly what I had told him. It was a thriving, healthy, profitable GP practice, kind of busting at the seams of what a single doctor can do with adjacent real estate. The real estate was for sale. It was for sale with the acquisition. And we looked at it like we could definitely knock into that space and add another 4 operatories, be it like a 10 operatory type situation. And or maybe 11 or 12 or even more, depending. And it was everything that I had asked for, and I wasn't excited about it at all.
Oh man.
It was a weird sensation to like walk through and be like, oh, this is exactly what I asked for, and I totally don't want to do this. Like this is not exciting to me. So it was weird to just realize that, but it was a very visceral. Like I felt it. Like it was just like, ugh, this isn't what I want to do. Like I felt tired just thinking about taking over this GP practice, running it myself, expanding, adding other doctors, like doing all these things. And like none of it seemed exciting. It was like all kind of in service of some future endpoint. And so that was a big realization for me. It was a big moment.
Yeah, definitely. I'm actually curious. So, were you ever able to? I think most of us can kind of infer, or have already heard on the show, that you didn't actually end up going through with this bigger GP practice. Did you ever, or were you ever able to pinpoint the reason why you just weren't really as excited about it as you thought it would be? Because, like, I feel like I'm sure to you and to a lot of people, like that, you would think when you saw that, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is an awesome opportunity. I can't wait to jump on this. So yeah, were you ever able to pinpoint kind of why you felt like you weren't as excited as you should have been?
Yeah, for me, a big piece of it, which has led directly into my next phase, was I realized I just don't like general dentistry at all. I hate fillings and crowns, and like the prospect of kind of having to run a general practice as the primary producer. And sure, I could bring someone in and have someone pretty quickly and step back to like a 1 or 2 day a week type role, but I just didn't want to do that kind of dentistry.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big light bulb moment for me of like, wow, this just isn't even on the table for me. And it went back to I wanted to do either root canals, and I realized I'd have to go specialize, and Christine would murder me if I did another residency. But I mean, but that was on the table. I mean, when I first took over the 3 practices here in Indianapolis, at first I was super stressed out, and I was like, maybe I should go do endo. Maybe I should just become an endodontist. I've got some great friends who are endodontists who really enjoy it, and that was on the table for a little while. But the other thing that was on the table was extractions and implants, and I had actually emailed Dr. Ryan McCall of McCall Dentures in Indiana 3 years ago when I was getting out of residency. I'd emailed him and said, hey, if you're ever interested, I would love to come work for you. Like I'm going to come back to Indiana when I get out of the Army. I'd love to do extractions and implants. And he had said, awesome. Like, let me know when you're out. And he had some big plans. And he said, yeah, maybe you could definitely fit within that picture of what I'm trying to build. Well, in the meantime, the startup that I started to then think of was like, okay, I need to do a denture and implant practice. Like I don't like GP dentistry, so I'm going to do this kind of a practice, and found some really good real estate. I would say found both some great gray spaces that I could build out, but I also found a previously used dental space that was built like 7 years ago, so not old at all. It was built breakaway style, and the dentist succeeded himself. He is now the #1 rated dentist in Indianapolis, and
Wow.
on Yelp and Facebook and Google all combined, he's got like 1,200 reviews.
It's impressive.
And yes, super impressive. And so he built like a big old separate freestanding building right around the corner from this original practice that was kind of tucked into like a shopping mall type area. And so his space was vacant, and it was very efficient. It was 7 ops in like 2,100 square feet, and the adjacent space was available. So made an offer to the landlord on both spaces, on the previous dental space and the adjacent space. And
Hmm.
the thought was we can build out a lab, we can build out a break room, kind of slash training room, which this one did not really have. It was like you can eat in the operatory, you're fine.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, I was gonna say 7 ops and 2,100 square feet is tight.
It was tight. It was very
Yeah.
tight. It was very efficient, but it looked great, and they were very successful in it.
Mhm.
But this worked. The only reason this worked was because it was a different style of practice. If I was opening a GP practice in his shadow, yeah, it would be a challenge, and yeah, I could do it. It also is across the street from another kind of like mega dental practice. So there's these two really big dental practices between him and this other guy, and I would be, really setting myself up for duking it out with the big boys
Mhm.
in this corner of Indianapolis. So because I was doing a different style of practice, it kind of made sense, and ended up getting a very generous TI dollar offering, like 225K of TI dollars, because it was on both spaces, and that would have allowed me to do essentially a free build out on like a 12 op practice, and then because I would use the existing 7 and build another 5, and then I would just need to equip, as many operatories as I wanted, and I could go as I went along, or equip them all up front. So I had a really, really good startup option in front of me. Um, but then, as I was looking at another practice, even though I kind of had that like sense of, man, I really don't want a GP practice, I continued to look at practices like almost out of discipline of like that's the right thing to do,
Mhm.
and came across a practice that was looking pretty promising, a GP doing a ton of pretty amazing work, and but there was some red flags. Like it was like a $2 million GP practice, 2 doctors doing a ton of specialty work, but it was almost like all the specialty work was being done to the point where if I were to acquire that practice, there was almost nowhere to go but down.
Oh
Um,
man, yeah, don't want
you
that.
know, this dentist was already doing like endo, molar endo, was already doing like all on fours, implants, like all of the stuff, cosmetics,
Wow.
very nice practice. Um, but I would be paying a premium for something that more than likely would go downhill. Um, or could.
Yeah.
Maybe I could pull it off, but that definitely was a possibility.
Yeah, I feel like
Um,
it's rare to see a dentist that genuinely is doing all the specialty procedures. Like generally, I feel like you'll see one like they might dabble in endo and then really focus on cosmetics, or like do a lot of implants and then maybe not do as much endo. But it sounds like this person was jack of all trades.
truly super dentist, and is a educator as well. So like teaching other dentists and all the above. So
Wow.
um but it was while I was at that practice, and I told the broker kind of my startup plans. I was like, "Man, if this doesn't work out, this is an amazing practice. If I can't find something to buy, I'm looking at doing a denture and implant startup." And he said, "Oh, let me talk to you after." Like he called me as soon as I got out of that practice, and he's like, "Have you ever heard of Ryan McCall?" And I just started laughing. I was like, "Of course I've heard of Ryan McCall. He's like Dental Town famous. I've reached out to him. I've seen his billboards in Indianapolis of the missing tooth billboard. It's hilarious." And he's like, "Yeah, well, I haven't listed it because you can't really list a 2 denture practice and kind of say the area without figuring out who it is really quick." Um, so he's like, I haven't listed it, but I've been looking for the right buyer for this set of denture practices. And would you be interested? And I was like, absolutely, let's take a look. So took a look, and you know, th- the one thing that initially stood out to me was that there was 2 overheads. This was 2 locations. It was a main location and a satellite location, and not really both of them were fully up to speed. Like he
Hmm.
was splitting his time between the 2 offices, and so when you've got staff going between two, you've got 2 rents. Overhead kind of creeps up kind of quick. So by the time we had the loan, um, and all of the existing overhead, there wasn't a ton of immediate cash flow. So there were some red flags initially just because of that dual location. But also there was a lot of potential of like, oh, if we can get both these locations really up and running, we can add implants, add CBCTs. And I also was going to need to add CBCTs at both offices. Neither offices had them; they just had panos, and they weren't really doing implants. Dr. McCall had attempted to bring on someone who would do some implants in the past, and it didn't work out. That person didn't stay on long term. So a lot of opportunity, and was able to make an offer and move forward. Um, got some no's from banks. Provide, which is formerly known as Lendeavor, who's a partner of ours, and we're big fans of them, and they do awesome things. Didn't once again, just like last time, didn't want anything to do with my deal. Um, but they told me up front that like, well, based on the overheads at these two offices and cash flow, like we're not super interested in this and wouldn't be able to get you financing. So that was interesting right up front to be both super excited about something and kind of concerned about financing at the same time.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong here. I feel like Provide is fantastic for more straightforward acquisitions. Like if you have a single location GP office that's doing relatively well, they're going to be the go-to 10 out of 10 times. Like they're quick, easy to work with, really just slam dunk. And the part where they kind of, I don't want to say struggle, but it's just not their market, is the more complex transitions with multiple locations, maybe different models. That's where they tend to stray away a little bit, which I don't blame them. I mean, it's different, and that's not their model, their market.
Totally. And I went to them first because they're awesome. Like they really do a great job. They make it very streamlined. They've got a great like package the way that they do their loans. And so I wanted them to be my bank, but you're absolutely right. They do really well with that owner, producer, single location GP. And if all of that lines up and the cash flow makes sense, then all day, every day, they're going to do a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that left me with SBA being one of the main options for lending, because I needed not only financing for the acquisition, but also to do some aggressive marketing, to add some equipment, possibly expand and add some operatories. Dr. McCall's Dental Town name was Two Chairs, because one of the practices that he kind of bought, he really did dentistry out of two chairs. He technically had three at the Castleton one, but only one surgical chair. So only one had like suction and hand pieces and stuff. And then he had two chairs at the Lebanon office. He's got the two offices that we bought from him. So I was looking to expand up front. So not only did we need this money to buy the practice, we needed more money on top of that to have a fair amount of working capital and equipment financing for equipment to be able to expand. So started looking at SBA loans, and that's a whole nother world. Have we talked about SBA on TPO at all?
I feel like we have briefly, but I think it'd be good to touch up on it again, especially given that they have a lot of favorable conditions in the current day and age.
Yeah, and those are very subject to change. So when I was initially starting this SBA process, it was like, sweet, there's this funding where they're going to pay for the SBA fee that normally gets tacked on due to like COVID stuff. There's some COVID funding, and then they're also going to pay your first 6 months of principal and interest, like straight up pay it, not deferred, not like tacked on at the end. It's going to get paid out of this pot of money. Well, as soon as I kind of get to the closing table and I'm signing the dotted line, they're like, "Hey, just kidding. It's only 3 months. It's not 6 months." But still something, and the fee still got paid, and I'm very grateful for all of that. But anytime you're depending on government funding for anything, it is subject to availability, and they are subject to change their mind whenever they want to.
Mm-hmm.
So, to describe SBA, Small Business Administration, is a loan. And I was just talking with Morgan from Provide the other day, or Lendeavor Provide, new names Provide.
You got
He
it.
was describing like they're able to do lending based on projections. So existing dental practices with a traditional loan, they are using historical cash flow to make the acquisition, because banks, dental practices, the weird thing about a dental practice is that there's not a lot of like traditional assets to seize because it's goodwill. Like if you think about getting a loan on a car or a house, the bank can come and repo the car or the house. But as a dentist, if you acquire a dental practice and then you tank it because you suck, there is nothing for the bank to repo. They can't come back and say, "Hey, can we get all those patient charts that left your office?" Um, so, however, fortunately, that doesn't happen most of the time. And that's why conventional lending can get you lending on the goodwill on a cash flow basis. They're looking at historical data. This practice has cash flowed so that we can therefore turn around and cash flow this practice. Um, so, SBA, they can lend based on projections. What that means though is you're going to have to like put together some projections. You're going to have to either hire a CPA firm or do it yourself based on good data in terms of P&Ls, both the existing practice and like what you're going to change. You're going to have to put together a business plan to take to the bank, and they're going to take all of that into consideration. They're going to use that in underwriting to say, hey, here is why we should lend to this dentist, because this isn't the typical mold, but he or she is going to do X, Y, and Z and grow this practice. It's also backed by the government up to a certain percent, so it changes. But the government will refund banks up to a certain amount if you were to default. And so you can get lending with an SBA in certain situations, whereas you couldn't get lending with traditional banks. So I in the past on the podcast, we've kind of like downplayed SBA as like, oh, it's a pain in the butt. It's more paperwork. It's higher fees. It's a higher rate. I am definitely paying a higher rate on my loan than a traditional loan. Um, but it can get you lending when conventional lending just doesn't work out.
Yeah, so it SBA. It's kind of like the opportunity cost to get into an opportunity that you might not be able to get into elsewhere or otherwise.
Totally. And I'm more than happy to pay. Like I'm paying like 6% interest on my practice loan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I went with Huntington. Huntington's one of the biggest SBA lenders nationwide. There was a local bank that I was working with to potentially do SBA, and they were actually going to get me a better rate. The guy was working really hard. He was really mad at me when I pulled out. He said some not nice things to me.
Oh no.
Yeah, it was like he said like, well, at least I know your character now. Like when I kind of pulled out, because he had
Oh
gone to
man.
bat. He had tried to get it done. However, he had all of my information the same amount of time that Huntington had my information. Like I gave them both the package at the same time, and a few months later, Huntington had everything like a week and a half before he did, and we were starting to get to the point where like I was questioning whether we could get to the finish line on this.
You snooze, you
So
lose. That's just how it goes.
you snooze, you lose. I felt like a jerk. The guy was mad at me, but you move on because that's just what you got to do.
Of course.
Um, so was able to get the loan plus some. I did have to have more money up front, so I had to have more money set aside, which I had been saving, up to sometimes 10% of the loan. So if you're buying $1 million practice, like having more cash sitting around is going to help with an SBA. So there's some drawbacks to the SBA, and if you can be more financially prepared, then you can open up to opportunities like this. There's also stuff with SBA and real estate. If you're buying the real estate at the same time, um, and SBA can kind of make that work as well. Whereas, and you will need money down on that. Whereas, like a traditional dental loan sometimes doesn't always work out that way.
Absolutely. Great. So you have, at this point now, you've gotten lending for the two practices and the
Mhm.
startup. Is that correct?
The startup was like a hypothetical at that point. So there was the startup that I was working on, which I then hit pause when I found McCall's offices. I just
Mm-hmm.
said, okay, we're not going to do that. And McCall's offices didn't line up with that location. Like they kind of would overlap with that location I was looking at, where it wouldn't make sense to do both, to do the acquisition and the startup.
Yeah.
So just move forward with the acquisition. And before the call, we talked about like hiccups and like what hiccups people have on acquisitions. And so I've been trying to think about hiccups with this acquisition. Um, lending actually went pretty smooth overall. Huntington was great. They were able to deliver. Um, the
I,
lease. Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I actually do have a question about the lending. Did
Yeah,
it ever cross your mind that um, doing an SBA loan with a bigger bank that's had more experience with it might be a little bit safer? And even though the rate wasn't as good, it might be a better overall experience in the long term. Did that thought cross your mind?
absolutely. As well as the fact that going back to them for more money in a short period of time, if they're like they carry large portfolios, this is not a big loan to them. So yes, absolutely. I was confident in their ability not only to close on the loan and do SBA because they do it all day long every day. I also was confident in their ability to navigate all of this like PPP COVID stuff. Like they had a team of attorneys who's like combing through every single piece of legislation to figure out how these things apply and how to make it work. So I was more confident in their ability to close. I was more confident in their ability to navigate PPP and to be able to continue to lend to me on future projects. And all of those together were why I made that decision. Um, so the lease was one spot that was kind of a difficult situation. So the banks need 10 years of term, and on one of the locations, it was not a problem. The landlord was like, "Yep, they're." I think they were month to month or year to year at that point. So we drafted a new lease. We negotiated that through a broker, the same broker that was working with me on the startups, then represented me on these leases, um, to get a new lease in place. So we got that new lease in place. But assuming the existing lease, there was a lease that had 3 years left on it on the main location of the McCalls, and that lease the landlord kind of had me. Like he knew that I needed 10 years of term to close the deal. But I'm on the hook already, or the McCalls were on the hook for 3 years at that practice. However, they'd already put TI dollars into the practice, so they didn't want to put new TI dollars. I wanted to expand. There was kind of two adjacent spaces that the McCalls had.
Mm-hmm.
They tried to do a digital denture lab in the back, and it didn't really work out. Digital dentures just aren't ready for 3D printed dentures aren't there yet. Acrylic is faster and better and lasts longer and works better. So there was this like weird 800 square foot space tacked onto the back of this dental office, and I was like, man, I want to expand into this, build some more operatories, and I'm going to need some TI dollars to do that. And he's like, well, we still have a 3 year lease here. And they just kind of got weird about us assuming that lease. And negotiations went back and forth. And I think their biggest concern was like they didn't want to give us another 7 years of term for nothing in return, like an option to renew for 7 years, because that ties up their property for 10 years. Um, and so it was like they kind of wanted something in return, but at the same time, it was like, well, um, you guys aren't willing to invest TI dollars. So we were at this impasse and we kept negotiating. And every time it would go back to the landlord's broker that was representing the landlord, it would kind of get confusing again. It was like I would talk with the landlord directly. We were all good. It would go back to the broker, and then it would get confusing, and it was delaying the deal. It was like I was like down to the wire on the real estate. Huntington was asking for like, hey, we need this new lease. Super stressful. It was like I don't know if this is going to even happen. It was kind of almost blowing up at different points. But we got there. We got to the finish line. They were able to do 7 years of term. I actually have to pay money if I don't fulfill those 7 years. So normally on an option, you have an option to do something, but then you can walk away. This is like I have an option to renew my lease, and if I don't exercise that option, then I have to pay 30K, which is weird.
Yeah,
Kind of
what the
sucks.
heck? Like, is
Yeah.
that's not standard at all, is it?
No, but like I said, they had me. I think his broker knew that they had me, like because they knew that I needed them to close this deal. So we negotiated it where I'm trying to invest in his space. He's not giving me TI dollars. And I said, well, what if any money I put into your space counts as goodwill and faith that I'm going to invest in this space and stay in this space? And so we're going to have any investment that I put into that back office construction count towards that $30,000. So if I end up putting $30,000 by adding 3 ops to the back of this, then if I did end up having to leave because we'd grown too much or something else had happened, then at that point he wouldn't charge us that 30,000 to not renew the option. So it got weird. It got weird for a minute, and we explored a bunch of possibilities, but it didn't get nuclear. We were able to like talk our way through it. And then all that said and done, we thought we were headed to close on time, and it was like the insurance that hung us up. The insurance delayed the closing by 3 days because we couldn't get like the property, business, whatever insurance filed in time. So I think no matter what, you just have to expect that transitions will get delayed. Like just closing date is like a proposal, and it's probably not going to happen if you're being honest with yourself.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of the same as buying a house, or building a house. It's like
Or
you
doing a startup.
exactly, yeah. It's like you set a date, you think everything's going to plan, you think it's all going smoothly, and when you get there, lots of times, more often than not, there's something that just pops up, just a nice little thing that prevents you from getting in. Great. So you said for that transition, some of the big pieces that you felt like kind of hung you up a little bit were the lease, lending, and then insurance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you said it wasn't like insurance for patients; it was insurance for the building and for the practice, correct?
Yeah, for the business, like business insurance.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like there's so many different types of insurance that you have to have as a practice owner that a lot of people probably don't think about. Just on top of your normal malpractice and that kind of thing. Great. So it sounds like okay, barring those like minor hiccups that you had there, it sounds like other than that, things have been going relatively smoothly for you.
Yeah. So I closed on March 3rd. I did not finish my last day of active duty and start terminal leave until April 8th was my first day of in the army. If you save up your days off, which I did during COVID because there's nothing to do with your days off, um, then you can use them at the end of your time in the army, and it's called terminal leave. So you're getting paid, but you don't have to show up for work, and you're like checked out, you're done. So
Sounds
my
very
terminal
ideal.
leave. Oh, it's sweet. It's awesome for transitioning for a startup or an acquisition.
Yeah.
You get paid for doing nothing. It's great. Um, so I wasn't on terminal leave yet. I was still working for the army. So Dr. McCall worked back for us. So he knew that. He knew that we kind of had this time period. And so for the last month, he came back and worked the days that he said he would. And he was awesome. I think people tell horror stories about the sellers kind of like being weird or weird stuff happening. And just truly him and his wife helped run the practice in a lot of ways. Class acts all the way around. They were great. And they moved out to California. They're there now. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do next. But I was very grateful for that 1 month where he was working back, because in the meantime, um, the first thing we did was switch IT companies and install 2 CBCTs. And that was like a huge upheaval. We ended up coming into the practice, and their IT company was like $1,100 a month. They weren't normally in the dental space. They were kind of a local IT company. And they had this weird cloud solution. It was like only 5 users were allowed between the 2 offices. And if someone got on to take the pano, it would like kick you off on this other computer.
Oh my gosh.
And it was going to be an extra $100 per user to add more users. So I was looking at like $1,400 to $1,500 a month, just for IT to be able to have my computer and servers all working together. They were great. It was a good company. Like they had great response time. So it worked. However, it just wasn't specific to dental, and it wasn't like thought out to interface with like all of the devices and stuff that we use as plugins. So we switched over to Dark Horse with Ruben Camp. Um, Dark Horse is all over the Making of a Dental Startup page. Good friends of mine have used him. It was Austin Davis, Dr. Austin Davis in Memphis, who referred me to Dark Horse, and had Danielle and Austin both had great experiences with them, and they were awesome. And it got us down to $800 a month between the two, 800 and change between the 2 offices. And if we add another location, it'll be like another like 300 a month.
Oh yeah,
for
that's not bad at all, especially compared to what you were paying.
yeah, and unlimited users and like full the IT support's been really good ever since. But that's like in a big immediate change. So we actually shut the practice down for like 3 or 4 days when we installed the cone beam and we switched over the IT and all of that. So that month of overlap time where he worked back for us and we were like updating a lot of things, switching stuff over, and I wasn't having to be the doctor all day, every day was a great month. So I think sometimes that transition too um, can be really good if that allows you to like get your head wrapped around all of these, switching over all the accounts and getting stuff all set up and, insurance credentialing, all that other stuff that you have to do when you're a new practice owner. So that's another thing to take in mind when you think about like a month or two transition period with the seller doctor.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I'm actually kind of curious what your experience has been like with insurance credentialing. I feel like I've heard a variety of, different experiences, whether it comes to negotiating your fees right away or just getting in network as quick as you can and then negotiating later. I guess what did you do on that front, and what are your thoughts on that topic
Yeah.
overall?
So on my last transition, the three practices that we bought 2 years ago, I looked really seriously at renegotiating in the transition. And it actually kind of became a big deal. Like, some people caught wind, some people got spooked. We lost an associate. It was three associates that were going to stay on in this deal. We lost someone because they were like, "Man, I'm gonna have to live through all of this insurance transition, and I'm not going to reap the benefit. You're going to reap the benefit in a year, but I'm just going to have to deal with all of like being in and out of network for different times of when you're negotiating in these different plans." And it was my fault. I botched it. I said too much to the wrong people, and lost a key team member in the transition, and almost blew up the deal entirely because I got too aggressive with, "Hey, I'm going to renegotiate right up front insurance stuff." And so in the end, ended up not doing that. We just credentialed as soon as we could. That's what we bought. That's what we were going to do. Um, and I will say that it's a big deal if you're going into a practice that is pretty heavily PPO, which is great. That's awesome. That's like what the most people do these days. Um, to tell your team like, "Hey, we're going to be in and out of network for 6 to 9 months to 12 months while we're renegotiating all these different insurances," which is what the insurance renegotiation company quoted me that was going to do all this for us. Is like, "Hey, this takes a while. Um, you're going to have to drop some and put some on. We can't guarantee when we're going to be able to get this done." That was a big deal to the team, like, and to our patients too. You can get around it. You can explain that to your patients, but it became a big deal. So this time around, Dr. McCall was out of network with all but one insurance, which was one of the Delta premiers. So I chose not to credential with any insurances. So I am completely fee for service on these two denture practices, and it honestly hasn't been a problem, because the team is so used to it. Like, the team knows how to see what will get paid as an out of network provider. They explain to patients really well when insurances don't pay to an out of network provider or other things. Like, they're just used to it. They're used to being out of network. And so it's like not a big deal for them to talk through that with patients. And I think I probably like people uh underestimate the difficulty of that transition if they ever think they're going to go from PPO to fee for service. It's a big deal for your patients. It's a big deal for your team. Um, and so we've made the choice to be out of network, which makes sense in this type of practice because like people who go to the dentist regularly with their insurance tend to like get cleanings and have work done. Denture patients tend to have not gone to the dentist for the last 5 to 10 years. They're expecting a big bill. They're expecting it to like be a thing. And if you've got a good reputation, they're coming to you because they're like, "Hey, this is a big deal to get all my teeth out and get dentures or get implants." And I'm okay if it's out of network, or I expect to pay the difference. So that's been my experience with insurance credentialing.
Yeah. So theoretical situation here, you're buying another GP office that's mostly PPO. Are you credentialing? Okay, obviously you're credentialing right away. Are you renegotiating fees right away, or are you pushing that down the road just to eliminate some of those bumps?
Yeah, and I would say that these, like, insurance credentialing, renegotiating people, like, if you're looking at either, like, getting maximum reimbursement or renegotiating, startups are kind of the way to go, because you hire them and you do it right up front, and you get the stuff negotiated really well up front. It's a lot messier once you're already credentialed, and it's really messy in an acquisition to try and, like, hold off on credentialing and negotiate. So there's not a great answer on acquisitions. Like, the answer is, if you buy a PPO practice, you should probably credential with those and try and do it as efficiently as possible to not delay kind of an interruption in coverage there.
Mm-hmm.
Would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I feel like too. If you're waiting longer to get credentialed because you're renegotiating those fees, it potentially might be a longer period of time where the patient has to bill out of network, or you're just kind of introducing more uncertainty into what a lot of people are already seeing. Whether it's patients or staff as an unstable situation. So yeah, I think, at least for me, based on what I've heard, that waiting to renegotiate might honestly be the better call, uh,
Totally.
just because less uncertainty for everyone involved.
Absolutely. I will say, like, I really, really like this model. Like, I really like, I literally have not placed an implant yet. So we closed almost 2 months ago. It'll be 2 months next week. And it's taken a while to get the CBCTs installed. It's taken a while to get, like, the implant motors. And then we've been so busy with denture patients that even the implant patients that have been coming in for consults on implants, we can't get them in to do the bigger surgeries. However, we are doing our first two all-on-4s at this office on the 5th and the 10th of next month. So I'm super excited about that. Um, and getting up to speed, and we're going to really crank up the implant marketing. But even just the dentures and extractions. I mean, I come in and I do all the extractions, and the team does the majority of the denture work. I occasionally, if there's a crazy patient who just is or just a patient who's having a really hard time, and they want to see the doctor, then I'll come in and see him. But the team is really good at handling all that denture work, and so it's like I don't really get out of my chair unless it's a consult or a bunch of extractions, which I love. And it's been really amazing to me to see that, like, sometimes people think they don't like clinical dentistry, but sometimes it's just the wrong clinical fit. It's the wrong practice type, and they should either specialize or niche down or figure out a way to make it work. And for me, like, this is the kind of practice that I really enjoy, and the kind of dentistry that I really like. So it's been very satisfying, even though I'm not placing a ton of implants quite yet.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I think too, still for me, still being in school, uh, even if you're doing the procedures that, let's say, you might like down the road, I feel like school just has a way of like sucking the like happiness out of you, just like how tedious and all the different steps and waiting. So it's I almost feel like it's hard to tell what you really like until you're actually doing it outside of school, uh, because like I was saying, it's just there's a lot of things in school that make things difficult and more tedious than it needs to be.
Totally. No, and it's I think it takes sometimes, I mean, it's taken me 6 years to figure out the kind of dentistry I like doing, and that includes a 2-year residency where I was doing, like, a lot of advanced stuff. That includes, other time periods where I was, um, kind of a less hands-on owner, and had a regional manager who was awesome, who took care of a lot of stuff, and includes some GP dentistry. So sometimes it just takes a while to figure out, like, what you truly like, and what you are interested in. I will say, and this is kind of dangerous. So if you're listening to this summer of 2021, so uh, May, June timeframe, maybe July, and you're interested in maybe doing this kind of practice in Indianapolis, definitely reach out to me. We are starting location number 3 here in a minute, and I am looking for a 4-day-a-week associate. So if you're looking at dentures and implants as something that you're interested in, um, reach out on Facebook, email me, richard@sharedpractices.com. And if there's a position still available, I'll let you know. If we've already filled it, I'll let you know. But it's a pretty sweet model.
Yeah, didn't little surprise bonus on this episode this week. We weren't expecting it, but we'll always take it.
Yeah. Well, I need someone. So.
Yeah, that's great. Well, yeah, I think this has been a great episode. Is there anything else you want to tack on to the end here before we wrap things up?
I will say that I really took to heart. I've been telling everyone that my favorite episode of the podcast right now is TPO 55 that George and Tyler did in January of this year. That went back and kind of re-summarized the first 3 seasons of our podcast and with what we know now. And one of the things George said in there was getting comfortable with financial risk and taking financial risks. Right now, I am in this phase of just an outpouring of money, 2 cone beams, 2 big implant motors, expanding equipment. I'm trying to hire some new team members. And it's I'm just watching the money in the bank account go down because between paying the team and the overhead and all of the stuff, I had some money that I got from the bank, but we're not seeing the return quite yet. I know it's going to be there. But I also bought a Tesla and it's coming next Wednesday. And so I've tried to take that to heart of the financial risk and being okay with that, going out of your comfort zone. And despite just this continuous outpouring of money from the practice account, I'm confident that it's going to work and it's going to be worth it. So I would also just say that I think having that mindset is also a lot easier because I did save a lot personally, so that I had money set aside to be able to weather this transition. So it's I've got some income sources and some liquidity. I think going back to liquidity being king, there was so much in this deal that wouldn't have been able to happen if I didn't have a pot of money set aside for this transition. And that takes sometimes a little bit of time to build up as an associate working for someone else. So that would be my another just huge takeaway is that if you're going to be a practice owner, stockpile cash like a chipmunk storing for the winter. You're going to need it.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, that's great. Yeah, I really think that's a good way to sum it up. Great to have liquidity. Great to have a Tesla. And sometimes you just have to kind of pucker up and be willing to spend a lot of money up front to get a great long-term result.
I also will say to that too was on the 3 practices, we were in the multi-million-dollar debt, and I was looking at different options at different points of time, and at one point I was looking at over $3 million of debt myself. And so it's also funny how stuff is relative too, where you're oh, compared to that, $1 million of debt's not bad at all. Let's go.
Yeah.
So it's all relative too, and I hope that sometimes our podcast can sometimes serve as a bad reference point for people because they're oh, Matt Garino money or all these other things, and it makes them feel like they've got this FOMO of my practice isn't as successful as X, Y, and Z. But it also can serve as a raising your vision of what's possible and what's doable. And it's even though it's scary to take out 1.5, $2 million of debt for the right practice, that can be the right thing if it makes sense and it lines up with your vision.
Exactly. I couldn't have said it better myself. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Richard, for being on today. We really appreciate it. Honestly, I feel like it's been a while since we've recorded, or have we ever recorded together?
I don't know if just you and I have.
Yeah.
This is the inaugural TPO Richard Payton combo.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be more to come. But like I said, really appreciate it. You're always a wealth of knowledge, and we'll probably be looking forward to hearing some updates from you here in a little bit once you have some more experience at these new practices under your belt.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. This was awesome.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for listening, everyone, and we'll see you guys next week on The Pursuit of Ownership.